Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today. We haven't not yet started. We're just letting you all into the room, and we'll get going here momentarily. We are going to let the numbers grow and make sure everybody who is here in the waiting room waiting for us to get going is in the room, and I'm just filling the silence, as I always do, so that you don't wonder whether we've started and so that you don't wonder whether or not your speakers are working. If you can hear me, your speakers are working. If you can't hear me, not that you would know, but your speakers aren't working. So, okay, it looks like we're still growing a little bit. We can give another 30 seconds or probably 15 seconds or so um, to get going. All right, looks like for now we probably have plateaued. We'll undoubtedly get more people to join us here as we start, but let me begin here. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Gene Quinn. We have an interesting conversation about artificial intelligence and what are the best practices for using artificial intelligence as a part of your innovation pipeline, or really to facilitate and make your innovation pipeline better, more robust, probably cost a lot more, and undoubtedly capture a lot more that you didn't necessarily know that you had going on. All kinds of synergies are possible. You might discover people in your organization working on the same thing, and they may not even know each other. They may not even be in the same facility. So this is an exciting time, and we're going to talk about what these best practices are. We're going to talk about the pain points and how AI can help you with those pain points. We have a great panel. I think all of our panels are good, but this one I think is particularly good. We have a lot of different perspectives. So I'm just going to kick it straight over to Renee and introduce our speakers. Renee.
Thanks, Jean. So on our panel today, we have Stacy Friedrich. She's the Director of Global IP for the global leader in water and heating and HVAC at Rheem. With a background in chemical engineering and experience as a former law firm partner, she blends technical, legal, and business insight to build structured, scalable innovation programs. Today, she's helping shape how organizations integrate AI into IP strategy to drive real business impact. Next, we have David Hyams. He's the co founder and chief business development officer at Longship Legal, where he helps scaling companies align innovation and IP with business values. With more than 25 years of experience across commercial, corporate, and IP law in both in house and firm settings, he's known for turning legal strategy into business growth. And when he's not advising clients, David's also a jazz pianist and composer. Next, we have Scott Frank. He is the former president and CEO of AT&T Intellectual Property, where he led a 10,000 patent portfolio and drove billions in revenue through innovation and IP deals. Now managing partner for IP at Venadar, he helps organizations turn ideas into strategic growth. Scott also chairs the Global Intellectual Property Alliance and advises Georgia Tech and Georgia State, continuing his work advancing IP's role in business and society. Next, we have Sam Zellner. He's the founder and CEO of InspireIP and leads PQAI, an AI-driven prior art search engine transforming patent quality and accessibility. A seasoned IP strategist, Sam has spent his career shifting IP from a support function to a growth driver. Through InspireIP, he helps organizations make innovation more accessible, efficient, and aligned with strategy, raising the quality and impact of patents worldwide. And last but not least, we have Gene Quinn. He's a patent attorney and a leading commenter on patent law and innovation policy. He founded IP Watchdog in 1999 and has twice been named one of the top 50 most influential people in IP. He's regarded as an expert on software patentability and U.S. patent procedure and has repeatedly been recognized as one of the top IP strategists in the world. So, like Gene said, you are in great hands with this panel. Back to you, Gene.
Great. Thanks a lot, Renee. And thank you once again for joining us here today. We have a lot of ground to cover. We don't have a PowerPoint, so this is going to be a conversation. We would really like to make you a part of that conversation. So if any point in time you have questions for the panel, please use the Q&A box here on Zoom. If you want to reach out to Renee and her team or chat among yourselves, or if you have a very specific question about Inspire IP and what they can do to help you please go to the chat box for that. I generally don't get to follow the chat box. Sometimes it gets pretty active. So if you do have a question for the panel, please definitely put it in the Q&A box. So with that introduction, what I'd like to do is kick it to our panel to start and give me their big picture thoughts. And while I'm doing that, I'm also going to launch our first poll question right away so that we can find out from you what it is that you do to currently track disclosures. So if you could answer that poll question for us, that'd be great. But Stacy, let's start with you. Big picture, what are your thoughts on this important topic?
Yeah, well, I think it's a really exciting time. It's a great time to be playing around with tools. There's a lot of new tools that are coming out. I definitely am playing around with a lot of different tools. So I think I see a lot of potential. I also think though that there's a skill set that we're developing, right? There's this new skill set around prompt engineering, how to interact with AI. We're going to talk, I think, a lot about that today. And some of what I've been thinking about on, how to get the most out of these tools and how to identify areas where you can really gain efficiencies, right? That's what it's all about, is making our lives a little easier, making the quality of the program that we are managing more impactful, better. I think it's exciting, but there's, some caveats and there's some pitfalls, I think, that we'll talk through today.
Yeah, it's an eyes wide open moment. There's a lot of power out there, but you got to make sure you're stepping properly, you might say. So great. Thanks. Good start, Stacy. David, let's go to you next. From your perspective, what is the big picture view here of using AI in the innovation pipeline?
I mean, I think what we're finding, especially in the work that we're doing with the clients that we're working with directly, but also looking at the industry as a whole, we see that AI is an accelerator of business processes. It's sort of like the biggest picture, right? So, the what your business processes are, how you've built them to capture innovation throughout the organization. AI is an incredibly useful tool that can help speed up or automate many of these processes. But as I'm fond of saying, the matrix cannot tell you who you are. So what this does is AI, as a part of your overall business operations, can accelerate, but it cannot help you necessarily identify what your key differentiators are in your business, like things that your competitors can't or won't do, but you do very well. It kind of comes back to a certain extent, what business processes have you built that identify key intangible assets like inventive concepts? And can AI be applied in various ways to accelerate or assist in those business processes? So that's generally how we kind of look at things. We tend to have a more sort of holistic approach to intangible asset capture. But we're finding that a lot of our clients are using AI tools, including InspireIP, to facilitate business processes and speed things along.
Okay, great. Good start. Thank you. Scott, your initial thoughts here. I know you're doing some work in the private sector now, but you have been, and most people probably know who you are, but you really were in charge of the AT&T portfolio for more than a generation and with great success. So what say you, I mean, whatever perspective you have, but maybe first, if big picture, what does this mean for companies with portfolios?
Yeah, it's game changing, and it's also complicated. It's you wish you could just push a button, get the answer. I think a lot of people are familiar with like ChatGPT. You tell it something, it gives you an answer, and I think a lot of people think it's the right answer. But the fact of the matter is, AI is powerful. It can save you a lot of time, it can save you a lot of money, but you got to be real thoughtful with it. It doesn't just get you everything you want. It doesn't invent for you, for example. In fact, if it invents for you, you can't even patent it under the current U.S. law. But what it can do is it can tell you a lot of things about where the industry is going. It can tell you a lot of things about what your competitors are doing. It can tell you a lot of things about where your invention fits into the landscape. And that is that is incredibly helpful especially when you have a big portfolio.
Excellent. Good. And Sam, the final word on this introduction goes to you. Where do you want people to focus? And it might be worth saying, and I'm not sure this came through is in Renee's introduction, but you have spent a lot of time as a frontline innovator. You have hundreds of patents yourself. You know this process from the innovator's standpoint, inside and out. You know what worked for you, what didn't work for you, and so what say you?
Well, building off of what the others have already said, I see this as like the internet moment to IP, and the real question becomes, is this going to make the value of IP just take off? And my belief is yes, it will. Just like the internet took e-commerce and took it to a new level, I think this is a game changer, as all the other panelists have said. This is a game changer. It's going to change the quality. It's going to change the focus of patents, and they're just going to get that much better. I think they're going to be orders of magnitude better in quality. And I
Mhm.
think this is a time when, like any new technology, it's still in its infancy. There's overhype, as we know, with the typical curve, but you need to have it in your mindset, like Stacy, like David. You need to be playing with it, getting familiar with it, and obviously, like Scott said, be cautious. It is new technology. And I think a lot of people are thinking this replaces everything, but as David said, this is additive. This is not a replacement. This is additive to your processes and all that. And so
Yeah.
I think it's a very exciting time for us in IP. And I suspect people look back and say, "Oh, this was obvious. Of course, it's going to make patents super valuable. Everybody knew that." But, yeah.
Well, I think, I might actually answer my own question here just very briefly, because listening to what you said, this is the internet moment. Potentially, we'll look back on and say that, this is that pivot. I also think this could be maybe in some ways akin to the jump from 3G to 4G. Where under 3G, you couldn't possibly have an Uber with 3G because there just wasn't the ability to have that tracking and monitoring and watching and not just Uber, but there's a whole host of companies now and things that we use on a daily basis like that, with the real-time tracking of what's going on and what's moving and so forth, and calling what you need and delivery and that sort of thing. Just wasn't possible under 3G. And I had the opportunity to talk to one of the pivotal innovators in the 4G space. And what she told me was, what was really exciting to her is they could not have ever predicted what people were going to do with that enhanced ability. And that was really exciting. And I think we're going to look back on this moment and have that same kind of thing. If you're not using it right now, you need to start using it, because if you're not using it, you don't know what it can do. You don't know what and it will do, and you're not going to be creative. I think there's going to be a lot of creative people add a lot of value. Stacey, I see you shaking your head. Do you agree with that? In which part?
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think one exercise I've gone through is just thinking about use cases, right? And you start with some that I think we'll talk about today that are, maybe low-hanging fruit, the things that are being talked about widely, improving disclosures, doing searching, drafting apps, all of this. But then if you really let yourself get creative, you can start coming up with some, pretty off-the-wall stuff like, gaps analysis, different things that, really, a team like mine, we're very lean, we're very small. We don't have the bandwidth to do things like that. And so opening up an opportunity for us to be able to feed some information into the system. I think I like David's point of these, these business processes, you have to have them in place to feed them into the system to get the output you want that's relevant for your business. You can't just say, do a gaps analysis. You have to be giving it that right prompt. But, so I think that's really exciting. And I encourage everybody to do that kind of use case, thinking, brainstorming. What are the use cases that they might be interested in?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I just published the results here from the poll, and the largest seems to be third-party software is being used to capture and track disclosures, and then sort of in a tide coming in right behind that is custom internal system and no system, no formal system. It seems like people are sort of all over the place here. Does this, Scott, does this, any of this surprise you here, what you're looking at? I mean, everybody seems to have their own different way of doing this.
Yeah, and on the one hand, it is a little surprising that, you'd think the industry's kind of, matured. Everybody kind of would be talking and using a lot of the same things. I think this points out how kind of fragmented it is and how things are changing so fast, and some people are keeping up and some people are not. So, yeah, me personally, it is surprising, but I think it just tells us about the opportunity that we have to harness the knowledge and to really move the industry forward in a big way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, David, thoughts on that?
Well, I was just musing as I was looking at the survey results that part of the spread might be explained by the different kinds of businesses that are perhaps responding to this, right? A $1 million business is going to have a very different system and different levels of robustness in their various intangible asset capture procedures than a $10 million business or $100 million business or a $1 billion business, right? You have greater resources, well, different levels of resources, different levels of need. So it's probably perfectly fine for an early stage company to, use a spreadsheet or some kind of Airtable or some kind of online tracking tool. As those companies start to scale, they're going to very quickly either have the wheels fall off of that process or recognize the need for and then implement some more formal process.
Yeah. Yeah, we have Sarah has pointed out, and Sarah, much like many of you on this panel, she's she's a head of IP where she's at, said that using third-party systems seems like it could be highly risky. How do you mitigate the risks if that's what you choose? Any thoughts on that, anyone?
I think it's interesting that she sees the risk there. I think the risk is actually in the people who are not using any system or a custom internal system. And the reason I say that is because amazingly, people a lot of times have impressions there aren't that many ideas out there. We have a few ideas, but we don't really have that many ideas, and you just don't realize how many ideas you're missing. I work with Scott and at Bell South, we only had, what was it, Scott, a few patents, right? And then we started doing the program and start really formalizing it. And guess what? It took off. Thanks to Scott's leadership, we started having, hundreds of patents growing, and nobody realized, like, wow, has Bell South, has AT&T, has the company changed that much? No, we just got a program going. We got people thinking about IP and making it happen. And I think even though you think, well, why are we using a third-party software? I would remind people, remember when people started saying cloud software? We'd never put our data in the cloud. Oh, no, now everybody's completely comfortable with it. So, it's a change for some companies, but I think it's something that, this is so fundamental. You need to have something that's done professionally and is grown and managed professionally rather than, ad hoc type system.
Yeah, and I wonder too whether, like because a lot of these things mean something specific to different people. They hear
True.
different things. So, and Sarah did follow up and said, as long as it is a closed system, that would seem like it would be fine. And sometimes I think, when you hear third-party system, you're like, okay, well, what can I download from the internet and use, like that everybody's using, almost like, like whether it be TurboTax or something like that, which I don't think you want to be using the TurboTax, but I do think you probably want to be using a system, a closed system, appropriately confidential, that all that checks all those boxes, saving the invention in the countries where you can have it, if you're inventing overseas and it can't leave the country or what have you. And we have some of those same issues here in the US. But you want to be doing it with somebody who knows this space and can tailor, unless you're like a gigantic company and you really truly have invested in your own proprietary system, which I always wonder whether that's really worth it, right? Because once you go in down the software development angle, today constantly chasing it. And I know this is a silly example, but even with something as simple as WordPress, which we use for IPWatchdog.com, when WordPress updates, like almost every plugin now is broken. Or, like within every other update, every plugin we have to touch and update and fix. And that's just something very simple, so I don't know where the line is for how big do you have to be, how many resources do you have to be willing to spend. But I'm not a big fan of chasing software development. And that's what AI is, right? I mean, let the people who do that for a living day in and day out chase it for you. But check the boxes, of course, to make sure that it's safe. Make sense? Does that everybody agree with that or disagree?
I think it brings up the issue that, which is very tough, is all of a sudden the IP team, even though they were considering it before, security becomes a huge issue. And I know Stacy, I'm sure David, and Scott, you're constantly now thinking about security and what does it mean and what configuration do I need to have, as you're saying, Gene, to make it secure and comfortable for you and your business.
Right, right. Good, good. Okay, so I want to pivot to talk about, I'm going to launch the next poll question here momentarily. But before I do that, and it'll become probably obvious, this has something to do with pressure points and problems. I thought maybe I could ask you, Stacy, about what do you see as the key elements of, an in-house program, disclosure program. And you feel free to weave in the AI if you want, or if you want to just talk about it generically to start. But what needs to be there in your opinion?
Yeah, I think this has been an interesting, as we've started looking at some of the tools and building prompts to make the output better, it's been interesting to test our foundational elements, right? And think about what do we need, or maybe I think David's earlier point, like what exists in our minds that we maybe don't have written out as a policy or a framework that should be memorialized, right? Because we're now shifting kind of hopefully from some of that happening, mentally for us to these tools helping us do it. So to me, I think, making sure you've got documentation of your policies, your frameworks is really important so that you can leverage that when you're starting to use the tools. So how do you think about risk at your company? How do you think about what you should be filing on? So if you've got factors that you look at, put those into writing so that you can help the AI to better assess your disclosures as they come through, right? To put them up against that framework. If you've got some sort of rating system that you use, I know a lot of companies do that for, how solid a disclosure is, give it that information, right? But just make sure that the foundation is there that explains all those, what were previously sometimes mental processes, in a clear document. And so then I think you start thinking about what are areas of improvement. So when I think about that, I think about better disclosures. I think, a lot of companies struggle with inventors who don't have the time. They don't have the time. There's obstacles for whatever reason for them to actually put, pen to paper, fingers to keyboard and get that disclosure into the system. So how do we help that, right? How could we leverage AI to help with that problem? So I start thinking about, should our disclosure form be reworked, right? Is it fewer questions? Is it, just give me a PowerPoint, which, a lot of us, our engineers work a lot just in PowerPoint. They've got it somewhere. They've got the CAD, but delivering it into that disclosure format can be a challenge. So so I start thinking about, is there a better disclosure form or improvement that we need to make there? Do we want to work on improving our review process? So starting again, going back to those factors, like those mental processes that, maybe were taking place before, documenting those factors so that, a tool might be able to give you a preliminary assessment of where does this stack up in your framework? Thinking about how the process works when you are evaluating a disclosure, what people are there, what people need to be there. How does this fit into the overall roadmap of the company, right? So again, committing all of this into a usable format that can, be used by the tools. Do you want to use the tools to help review drafts. Are there particular boilerplate or particular definitions or those types of things that you want to see in your apps when they come through? So again, committing all of that to writing. And then I also think about KPIs. So, how is your team or your inventor group assessed? So does leadership want to see specific KPIs? How many disclosures are we actually filing on? What percent of certain filings relate to what technology areas? All of those things that maybe we're already being asked to deliver. Just capturing that, in a policy or in a way that it would be potentially easy to feed into, an AI prompt and say, okay, here's my data, here's the KPIs I need to be tracking, you do it versus my team doing it. So those are the types of kind of, I don't know, foundational elements, I guess, that I've been thinking through. Again, it all goes back to kind of those use cases, I think, and, thinking about what do you want out of your program? Where do you want your program to be? What are the, improvement areas for your program?
Yeah, no, good stuff. Let me launch now that we've kind of teased this, I'll launch the next poll question here so we can find out from the audience where they see the problems. And David, maybe I can go to you next, and maybe pick up on this theme of, where you can and should be thinking about your invention disclosure system at large and what it needs. I know you already mentioned in your big picture thought segment about startups or smaller companies with less resources, and there is a natural process that goes from, you do everything in Word, and then you start using spreadsheets, and then you start using at first less sophisticated tools, and then you start using more integrated tools like an InspireIP. Where do you think, or when do you think, or however you want to characterize it, when should companies be making that pivot to really say, okay, no, we can't do it that way anymore. What we need out of our system is just too robust, or the possibilities are too great that we're just not tapping what we could tap unless we do go more robust.
Right. I mean, it's an excellent question. It's also one that's really hard to answer in a, generic sense. In a lot of cases, it's going to be case by case, but there are some things that you can think of sort of overall. I was thinking as Stacy was speaking about all of the various details that can go into the thought process of building out this, invention capture, inventive concept capture, all of the different concepts that go into it, that the difficulty, the challenge of building out any business process is the sort of thought process of identifying all of those different elements. And one thing that another thought I had as Stacy was speaking, one thing that AI will actually help you do is do that gap analysis and identify holes in your business processes that enable you to backfill. You notice that something's not being captured effectively or in the way that you want, or at a high enough level of detail or too much detail. You can use that feedback to adjust those intake processes. But I guess the theme that I'm using to answer your question here is one of feedback. It's very challenging, but incredibly important to keep one's finger on the pulse of the business, right? So to your point, what might work for a startup will probably not at all work for a $100 million company, right? So what's the break point? You will know that when you start to see changes in business behavior, in the feedback that you're getting from your inventors. And that feedback can come in a number of different ways, right? One is the explicit feedback of, I hate paperwork. Please stop making me do this. But one can simply be in as companies grow, as the teams that are generating inventive concepts get busier and busier. You can use tools to sort of speed up the manual review of those inputs, the disclosure documents, to see that the level of detail is going down, or people are submitting them after a very short amount of time in the form or whatever, using that various feedback to say, okay, people are too busy, or they don't understand what it is that we need here on the legal side of things, or they don't understand. There's some gaps that you can identify using the feedback tool. So while I don't have a sort of one size fits all answer for Eugene about like when should businesses be growing their systems, It's really keeping an eye on the feedback from the business, whether that's through KPIs or through data capture from an AI tool or some other way. And managers, if they're being effective, will recognize and hopefully be able to identify forward going rather than, again, after the process is broken, the need to develop more robust systems.
Yeah. Okay, good. Good stuff. Let me end this poll question and publish the results so that we can all see what the audience has said. And maybe not surprisingly, is getting the disclosure from the inventors is the biggest pain point. Followed by half as many respondents said getting inventors to respond to drafts or complete the paperwork or coordinating between legal and business stakeholders. So this is maybe not too surprising, and we have one of the people in the Q&A box mention about the complexity of the system. It can't be so complex that it doesn't that it just actually discourages people. They like to create, they don't like doing paperwork, and that comes up in the poll, came up in this question in the Q&A, and it comes up in what David was just saying. And maybe Scott, I can go to you. Like, what do you think is the right balance? I mean, is it a shorter disclosure system with then follow up? Is it a little bit longer but guided or mentored disclosure system? I mean, and I suppose that a lot of us, there's the disclosure system we used to use, there's the one we're using today, and then there's the one we hope we have tomorrow. But what say you?
Well, I think every day people's time is getting less. People are asked to do more and more. And, I think, back 10, 20, 30 years ago, people, engineers, inventors had time, scientists had time to, not only invent, but document and work with their attorneys. And it was a whole different ballgame. But today's world is so fast. And I think that we need tools, we need support. It's not about a shorter form. It's not about asking the right questions. It's really truly trying to find ways to get done much more efficiently, and that's where whether someone talks it, whether someone types in a few words. I mean, we just got to some way. Again, when I was at AT&T, we got to some way capture this great idea from this person's brain as fast as possible before they get busy, they forget it, and you get it the best you can. And that's where AI plays such an important role, because AI can help guide, can help develop, and really help make sure that you fully bake the idea to get it to the patent office. It may not be perfect, but that's where an inventor, if you can give you a little something, and you follow up with, boy, is this what you said? You'd be amazed. Oh yeah, this is it, and here's a few tweaks. But it's I tell you, every day people have less time, and we've got to find ways to much more efficiently capture the ideas and get them to the patent office the best we can.
Yeah, no doubt. Now we have a couple people in the box asking questions along the lines of AI inventorship, and do you have to disclose that you used AI? And I mean, there's a lot there, right? I mean, I don't know that I've seen anything that yet that would give me any inclination that AI is actually an inventor or soon likely going to be an inventor. I think it fools a lot of us into thinking it is organically intelligent, I guess, or if you consider, or programmed to be organically intelligent. But I think what it does is it just is a mirror. It bounces our ideas off very well and collects, and then it also it gives you food for thought, I think. But Sam, I mean, you're developing these tools. What say you right now, just generically speaking, about is AI capable of conception like a human is?
I really don't think so at all. I'm with Eugene. I think it's very much like a reflection. It's sort of like a sounding board, and we do some things, unique things in terms of just mimicking patent attorneys in their approach of saying, Gene, could it do this? And everything, framing everything as questions. So
Mm-hmm.
we're at the same time, we're working with Stacy with our IP Assist, Inventor Assist, and we frame everything as questions. So we're trying to to the extent that anybody's worried about that, we try and make sure that we're following the best practices that patent attorneys have been using for years in their disclosure meetings, where they always ask questions, they never make statements. And
Yeah, and I think, Sam, and correct me if I mean, AI is really good at taking stuff that you've done. I just did this the other day with just not in our industry, but what I wanted to do, I actually took 10 of the articles that I had previously written, and I fed them into just ChatGPT, and I wanted a mashup of these, so everything I gave it everything, but what came back was really, I thought, pretty good. I mean, of course, I agreed with it because it was my own words, but but it's really good at that sort of a task. But what I find it less good at right now is just saying, okay, go out and do this. It requires the prompts. There's so many prompts and everything, but if you can give it a discrete task, and often a task that really in this one I could have done myself, but really good at crunching stuff and condensing stuff and summarizing stuff and finding things that you don't really appreciate are there, which would be a task that is just too much to undertake, not knowing what the outcome would be. Is that really what AI is best at right now?
I think it does a very good job of that. To Stacy's point, if somebody has a PowerPoint or a document and getting AI to then take that from the disclosure meeting, the disclosure, and now providing the other information, summarizing it concisely, highlighting components, that's what it does really well. We're also, utilizing a combination of PQAI doing prior art searching, and then like a chat GPT to then take the information, summarize it, and help you understand how your idea is compared to the various documents or patents that have been brought up by PQAI. It does a very good job with that type of thing. And
so let me ask you this. Kent asks the question, and I think I know the answer, but Sam, you'll be the one that can.
Okay.
Can AI mine an inventor's notes or notebook to determine if an innovation has been achieved by simultaneously conducting a landscape search?
Well, I'm not sure. What we are doing right now is we're taking, working with universities, for example. The challenge for the universities, tech transfer offices, is that a lot of professors are rated on publications, not on patent filings, ironically. And so they want to publish as quickly as possible. The tech transfer office is trying to control that in the sense that don't publish until we get a chance to look at it. So we have the ability to take a research paper, run it through PQAI. It pulls up information. We use ChatGPT then to look at that and analyze it and say, hey, here are the things that may be novel here. And so, it doesn't make an absolute decision. And I think we frame all our AI as assist, because we make it clear it doesn't work on its own. You need to look at what it's doing. But to your point, Gene, it can do a lot of very powerful ability to highlight things that you should be considering, which again, to Stacey's point and David's point, saves you a lot of time.
Yeah, and so I think that the answer is really that's precisely what AI is very good at doing. It's taking what you give it, looking at, summarizing it, finding out what's really there, and then also consequently what needs further development before it is there. Because if the AI doesn't understand it, that should be a clue. Or if it comes back to you and it gets in the summary, it gets it wrong, that should be, I think, some kind of a clue that. Because AI, well, I mean, the hallucination issue has gotten way, 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 way better. So it's not most of these tools, at least I've seen in our space, in the legal space, are not making stuff up. They're. I mean, like if you just go to a general tool and you try and get it to do something that is not programmed or taught to do, well, you get what you get then. But if you're using a specialized tool, they're pretty good.
Yeah, I think they are pretty good. Again, I think you need to know your field, you need to know the area, and be cognizant of it, because they do sometimes. They also have a tendency to be overly positive, and we've been working with the AI Inventor Assist, and we actually tried to put in personalities there, because we did see a lot of inventors were like, I'm tired of hearing everything is great. Yeah, that's great. That's great. So we try and caution. Yeah. on that
So,
aspect.
Stacey, I noticed you were following along with what Sam was saying and nodding a lot. So, I'm going to kick it over to you, give you an open mic to respond to any of it.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about what I see as the current strengths, I think, in some of the tools I've been playing around with, and maybe I'll just give one little anecdote that gets at the question that you read from the Q&A, which was, I'm kind of old school. I like handwritten notes. I have a notebook that I always have with me when I go to my meetings. So I went and visited one of our facilities and, took a ton of handwritten notes for, probably 20 pages. Took photos of those, put those into one of our AI tools and said, summarize this, tell me what action items I've got out of this. And it did a great job. And my handwriting is really, really bad. So, that's just the kind of stuff, to the inventor notebook type question. That is absolutely something that AI can do now, I think, is parse through an inventor notebook, pulling out key concepts, summarizing, then you feed that into a landscape search type question. That 100% is something that can be done now. Other strengths, other use cases that I'm using it a lot for is, summarizing. I think, Gene, that was your point as well, feeding all those articles in, right? So summaries of agreements, of disclosures, of prior art, of office actions, right? Summarizing key points, providing key takeaways, next steps. It's great at that, condensing a lot of information into a smaller, more digestible amount. Translations. I think it can do really well if, obviously you still need your formal translations for, for filings and things like that. But if you've got something that comes over, a patent document in another language, load it in there. And it'll get you, it'll get the job done. Chart building, so claim charts, portfolio charts, that kind of thing. I found it to be very good at. Agendas. So, if you've got a format of a review committee sessions that you do, give it, again, build out that format, give it that, and put all your disclosures into that, and it'll, come up with, exactly how you want to present things, summarize it for you. I think landscape searching, we were saying, that does a great job, kind of that initial patentability search, like the PQAI piece that Sam was talking about. Proofreading, of course, kind of polishing something that you've already got. Playbook alignment. So if you've got, a format that you like your apps to be in, feed it that. It can assess, how the drafting attorney did against that playbook. I use it a lot for information that I need to provide to multiple types of audiences. So if I've got an analysis that I've done, or maybe we've got a disclosure we want to file on, maybe you can do a report to the inventors, a report to executives, a report to our outside counsel, all these different audiences that maybe need a different tone and a different level of information. It's very good at that. Again, you've got to develop this muscle of prompt building, prompt engineering, right? To actually have it, create what you want back. But I have found it for all of those use cases to be, it's very, very good.
Yeah, I think you're right. And Scott, let me bring you in here, because from the perspective of like the leadership, what should the leaders at, these companies, whether they're business leaders or legal leaders, and you can answer from whichever perspective you'd like, what should they be doing to make sure that their IP strategy keeps pace, given the possibilities and given the inevitability that others, if you're not using it, others are using it? So how do you convey the importance of this to people who, they kind of have an idea it's important, but there's change costs, there's I'm comfortable in my lane, I really am maybe a little afraid of AI.
Yeah, I think you hit on something big. And, I think fundamentally human beings don't like change. And especially big changes that AI bring. And I think it really is up to the leadership of a company. You may have, other people in the company that are willing to get on board, but leadership needs to say it's not optional. We are going to potentially lose a lot of money. The company could be at significant risk if we don't do this. And I think the leadership needs to set the tone, needs to stay on top of it, needs to hold people accountable. And I do think it takes some time to transition, whether it's getting the software, whether it's the processes, whether it's the culture. it's something that I think the leadership, again, the executives, the legal leadership needs to make it a priority and needs to really drive this change, or they're going to be truly at risk of protecting their IP and optimizing it.
Mm-hmm. So David, let me ask you this question. I mean, as these tools are starting to mature, and you have tools people are using for innovation pipelines, docketing systems, IP management, across all different types of platforms and use cases. Do you see that the industry is going to coalesce around one or a few tools, or are we moving into a place where what you really ought to be looking for is, I need this vertical who can do that right, I need this vertical who can do that right, and then kind of cobbling it together yourself?
Yeah, I actually think that the unsatisfying answer to that question is we don't know the answer yet, right? The
Mm,
killer apps haven't been developed yet. These tools are frankly too new and they're still in progress, right? There are some that are very mature and very good for helping certain aspects of the idea capture and intangible asset capture and development. And the challenge with that is that each company's needs and processes are going to be somewhat different. And so you're going to need to customize the tools for your particular use case. Now, the good news about that is that these tools are incredibly flexible, and we're seeing even sort of a modular approach to different platforms, enabling the application of different kinds of AI, different AI tools across different verticals or across silos. Again, unfortunately, unsatisfyingly, it sort of depends. But the good news is that these tools are increasingly robust, and there are many, many tools, and undoubtedly there will be far more. And perhaps they will evolve to the point where they're even more customizable than they are today. If I could just respond to
sure,
something
go ahead.
that Stacy and Scott brought up though a second ago. We were talking about what these AI tools are good at. And they are very, very good at a lot of these different things that are sort of down in the weeds, very detail oriented, very sort of data analysis oriented. That jibes with our experience as well. These are phenomenal tools at friction reduction and data analysis. And also, they enable the humans to actually sort of reap the promised benefits of what AI was supposed to be good for in the first place, right? We were all told that AI is going to enable people to focus on higher value tasks or things that humans are good at. And it turns out people are good at things that AI is really terrible at. Reliable, trustworthy value judgments, complex analysis of the alignment of intangible assets and business goals, plotting strategy for increasing business valuation, deciding what intangible assets are important for achieving these goals. In this respect, these AI tools, regardless of what you're using, can accelerate these processes tremendously, and we're seeing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Sam, let me first, if you want to comment on anything that any of the other panelists have said, that would be fine too. But I would like to also get you to talk about what organizations should be doing, how they should be thinking about layering on AI to their existing systems so that it enhances what they're doing.
Yeah, let me first comment a little bit about the different specialized systems and things like that. One of the things that's unique about InspireIP is we focus on the invention disclosure process. We're not trying to make a docketing system. We interface to lots of the docketing systems. So we're about creating components that are really very good. I tell people, we make the entertainment system for your car, and we do a very good job for it. And so if you
Mm-hmm.
want a premium entertainment system, InspireIP can do that for you. And we, for example, also interface to different drafting tools. We know there are a lot of good players out there that are making very good drafting tools, and we're going to interface to them. So, again, about this aspect of being flexible, creating a platform in which different components come into it. We definitely see that, and we think that makes a lot of sense because it is a very rapidly changing environment, and lots of different players are coming in with lots of great talent, and we want to be best in breed for those people. So just
Yeah, I
so
personally
that
think
point.
that for the foreseeable future, that's where we're gonna maybe it winds up always being that way. But it does, by that, taking that approach, it seems to me that it likely minimizes the switching costs, because companies can use what they're familiar using and then just integrate these really cool tools that allow specific use cases.
Right. And one of the big pain points for switching is when you have to tell the whole company, hey, we're switching invention disclosure systems. That's a real pain point, because now you got to get all your inventors
Right.
oriented on it. And guess what? As David, Stacy, and Scott will say, everybody has a customized arrangement. We work with that. And so then you got to get another vendor all set. We feel like that's where there's some value.
Well, and just
So
also, if you're do everything, you try and do everything. You can't do everything well, so you're going to upset some constituencies who, well, this tool did this thing that mattered to me better, and so I do think the plug and play model, with people who really, I like the entertainment system model, because that's what it's about. You're around in your car, you don't want an automotive company making your entertainment system. We all know what that sounds like, but we all know what it could sound like.
Right.
If you let like Dolby run wild with your entertainment center, we know what that could be.
Exactly. But let's talk to the other question about, where do these things plug in? I think there's two components here. As we've talked about, there's the brainstorming, then there's the inventor, what we call inventor assist, helping an inventor who already has an idea to get it onto the disclosure system or articulate it to the IP group. Stacy talked about evaluating and summarizing disclosures that come in so you understand them better. There's also that aspect of putting the information together to present to your invention review board and helping them appreciate the ideas. We also see the ability to take a prior art search, not only a prior art search of public information, but prior art search of your disclosures, and say, have I seen a disclosure like this before? Are there disclosures in the pipeline that relate to this idea that maybe I should be combining together and now make it into a more robust disclosure? That we think is a very attractive area. And then we talked about drafting. And I look at it from a spectrum of risk. If you're nervous about this whole process, and obviously generative AI is one aspect that makes people nervous, then we suggest to people start off with prior art searching. And again, you can do prior art searching on your own disclosures. That's very safe. There's no generative AI coming out of that. And then you can start moving towards aspects of evaluating disclosures that come in, looking at drafting. And then to me, at the far end, there's brainstorming, which everybody already said, oh, could AI be an inventor? So we work with customers all across that spectrum. And again, each customer has a different tolerance, just almost like investing. What are you comfortable with? Is it very safe stocks? You're more aggressive in your stock picks or bonds and all that? So I think that's for all companies. You need to figure out where you're comfortable with. But like Stacy said, you can play with these. We have customers that do play with them. They just say, I'm not going to deploy it to all my inventors, just maybe a select few advanced inventors, so we can see how it works. And I think that's also a very good approach. And I know we're working with Stacy on some of that, and David.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have another question here about whether or not AI can identify weaknesses in a patent application before an examiner actually identifies them or finds prior art to cite against you. And I think the answer is yes. I know. Think I know for sure that people are already using this tool for that purpose. Stacy, I see you shaking your head. Do you guys use AI tools for that?
Yeah, I think you absolutely can. I think some kind of adjacent ideas would be, figuring out what art unit you're going to get put in, right? Understanding the, allowance rate of that art unit, and maybe that feeds into how you craft your claims. We talked about running it kind of against your company's playbook. So is there particular boilerplate or definitions or that kind of thing that you like to see? And then one thing we've already started doing is running both the disclosure kind of packet and the draft through AI to identify gaps. So are there concepts that were discussed in the disclosure, maybe in the disclosure call. I see some folks in the chat talking about doing transcriptions, which I think is a great use case as well, to capture all of that good information that an inventor may explain to you on the call, but maybe is not going to, spend the time to type up. But making sure all of that has made its way into the draft so that you're kind of as comprehensive as you can be. I think this question is taking it a step further, right? To actually think about what the examiner is going, how the examiner is going to evaluate it. And I think you absolutely can pose that to the AI. I'd be interested to see what it would come back with.
So, I was just going to say, I think that if you haven't looked at the transcription of AI transcribing, it's gotten shockingly good. I mean, like way better. To the point where it actually types what you said, not what you meant, and, like reading it, like I've read some transcripts that we've done like that. And it's like, oh, I know I didn't say that word. And then you go and you listen to the audio and I know that's exactly the way I pronounced it. It was me that was the problem, not the AI that was the problem. And then, so if you have that, then the other thing AI I think is really good at is summarizing. So if you like start layering these things together, you take from your inventors everything that you can get, and if it's not in transcription, transcribe whatever, and then get a summary of it, the condensing. And I think that that's where people think AI starts to be an inventor, because it's almost like magic. And it's like what we always used to say, like first time inventor, when you used to have the draftsperson actually draw the illustrations, they would look at that and they would get a tear in their eye and say, oh my God, I invented that. And it's like a moment of pride. But I think that's what's going on. It condenses, it takes without any biases what you've said to it and condenses it, and you read it back and you're like, how did I came up with that? And the answer is yes, you did. So, well, guys and lady, we are almost at the end. This has been a fascinating conversation here. I want to push the last poll question here, though, for the audience to get their input about where do you think your organization is likely to first use AI within the innovation or IP management ecosystem. And we'll get them to respond to that. But in the meantime, maybe we could start thinking about our final thoughts, our takeaway message. Sam, I'll give you the final word, but maybe Stacy, we'll start with you. What do you hope people leave today remembering?
Yeah, I guess maybe one of my themes is just building this skill set around prompting, right? Using the tools enough. I mean, even if it's just to make your grocery list or plan a vacation or whatever, whatever use case you have, start getting familiar with the tools and understanding how prompting works and how, creating better prompts can get you better output. I think somebody in the Q&A asked about courses for prompting. I would love, if anybody knows of any, I would love to hear about them. I think that's really interesting. I'm sure those are coming. I hope that, if there's any like law school students or, young attorneys, here today, that's a great skill set to focus on developing, right? Because that's a way you can really differentiate yourself kind of early in the practice. And some of the more senior folks may not be taking that time to learn that skill set. So I think, thinking about that prompting, I would suggest to that question about, is there a course? Some of the tools will actually have a kind of a button that will enable you to make the prompt better, that will say like, help me create a prompt. Play around with that too, right? Because that will show you how detailed. I think some folks, if you haven't used the tools very much, you would be surprised. You could put a prompt that's 2 pages long, right? We've got a prompt kind of that we use for reviewing draft applications that probably at this point is like 3 pages long, right? So these prompts can be really detailed. They can be really long. So I think building out your kind of templates, your boilerplate prompts, that kind of thing would be probably time well spent.
Yeah. And I'm like you, I would love to learn more about prompting, it always, because what I always inevitably do is it says, would you like me to do A or B? I pick one of the prompts that it suggests.
Yeah, I
And
think
it's really good, but
they're interesting. I always look at them, but I think you want to have some of your own.
I want to learn how to do that, because when
Yeah,
you prompt it properly, what you get back is gold. When you
yeah.
leave it to its own devices, what you get back sounds more like a teenager who's trying to get out of being grounded. But, all right. Thanks a lot, Stacy. David, your final thoughts here today.
I really like the point you brought up there about one of the issues with AI. It is too much like an eager puppy at this point, but we're getting there. I agree with Stacy that all of these tools are incredibly useful for businesses, and everybody should be leaning in as much as possible. So I want to come back to something that Sam mentioned early on to try to tie this together. He asked the question, do we think that AI tools are going to ultimately increase the value of intellectual property? I agree with that, but I want to add to that, right? So what we do at Longship Legal is we help scaling companies identify and create and manage their intangible assets explicitly aligned with their business goals. And the whole point of this is our explicit mission is to intentionally build company value. So I guess where I wanted to go with that was when Sam said, will these tools help companies identify and build increasingly excellent intellectual property, increasingly valuable IP? Our take on that is, I think it goes even further than that, that a well-constructed, well-captured innovation pipeline, intellectual property built around intangible assets is a multiplier for company valuation overall, so that these tools can facilitate and accelerate the process of value capture for increasing company valuation.
Mhm. Excellent and good points. Thanks, David. Appreciate you being here. Scott, your final thoughts here today.
Yeah, I think Stacy and David are right on target. And I like your question in the last poll, Gene, because you point out all the different ways that AI just kind of summarizes all the different ways AI can play a role. I'll just simply say that AI is here to stay. You might not like change, but this is going to change your life. And if you don't adapt, you're going to get left behind. And I strongly encourage you to, look at third-party software, look at other companies. InspireIP is a great company. AT&T, big customer of InspireIP. Not only do they give you great software that help you manage it, but they will also help you. They're great to work with. There's another company called Junior. I'm on their board of advisors. Patent drafting. It's amazing how much money you can save. So again, it's not just time, but money that we're talking about. And in today's day, I think there's so much opportunity. I'm now working as a free agent for a company called Venadar, and we will help you. And I'm just giving you some examples of ones that I think are great. There are so many others out there that are I think great too. Just encourage you to get on the AI IP bandwagon so you can get your ideas from your heads into people's hands as fast as possible and protect and maximize the value of them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks a lot, Scott. Appreciate you being here. And Sam, the final word goes to you.
Well, agree with all the very important points that have been made. And I'll just quickly say, in terms of Stacy talking about prompting AI, it is totally different from regular computer programming I used to know back in the day, where it follow things directly. You can prompt AI to do something and it will ignore it. And you have to say, did you do what I said? And, oh yeah, I forgot. So it's a really different type of prompting. We would be happy to work with customers on prompting, because it's just a very different way of thinking about helping and constructing it. But it's definitely very powerful. I would say that, as final comment, as all the guests have said, AI is a catalyst to help your system, but you still need underlying structure to your program and your innovation program. It doesn't replace that. And so, we help companies get that structure set, so then we can put the AI to make it work more efficiently, more effectively. You got to capture your IP, because it's going to be worth, as David said, significant value. And you're missing out if you don't do that. And this is the golden age to do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with that. I see in the last poll question, people put about half the folks put conducting prior art searches, and then 25% put drafting patent applications. And I think those are important use cases, but don't sleep on helping your inventors create invention disclosures, or maybe not even creating them, pulling it out of them in a way that they can deal, in a way that they can find it approachable. Because if you get good, better information from them, and then you layer on the searching with the drafting, that's sort of the trifecta. But it's without the good information from your inventors, then it strikes me as it's like a three-legged stool with a leg missing, or a leg that's a little shorter than the others. So, and I always used to tell people, it's in your head. I just need to get it out of your head, because I'm convinced that there's an invention there. I can't tell you how many times I would tell an inventor, I convinced you have something, but you haven't given me enough to know it. But I can see, I can hear, and we just got to get it from your head into my head. And that's, I think AI is going to be revolutionize that process. So that's my final thought. So thank you all for being with us. Thank you for sticking a little bit late. The conversation went long. I think it was a very good one. I appreciate you panelists for being here, and I appreciate you all in the audience for joining us. That's all we have for today. Hopefully we'll see you soon, but bye for now, everybody.
Thank you, Gene.
Thank you,
Thank
Gene.
you.
Thank you, Stacy, Scott, and David. Appreciate you taking the time.
Great job. Great to be a part of it.